it seems like the tariff situation in the US changes by the hour. Yes. One spell there's 100%, then it's 200%, then they change their mind, then there's a 90-day pause. What are the latest updates and how could they impact us here in the Caribbean?
Okay, well, certainly, you know, the big question is, what is the cause? Did Trump just suddenly jump in the air and say we're going to levy tariffs on the world, not just on its major trading partner? We know in his first term he had some issues with China, and you know that is where that comes from. Again, speculation, right? But China is a growing economy, and apparently challenging the US in the sense that it is not directly challenging the US. It is simply going about its own business and developing relationship with other countries. And the US apparently is not very happy with that. For what reason? We can always speculate. But what the US says, though, with several other countries, including China, is that there is a widening trade imbalance between both US and the rest of the world, is all its trading partners, not just China, but increasingly so with China, especially, which apparently has the capability to mass produce, is leading in technology, in social infrastructure, you know, etc. And Canada as well as Mexico, Canada more so. So the US is wants to narrow that gap. Also, they said that there are various tariffs that are levied on US goods from various countries. Something was in his liberation document he had published. I have not seen any other document to challenge that, to say this is so or not so. But he has shown that nearly all these other countries have a higher barrier, you know, to import than America. I'm not too sure if that is so. But those are the things he says he's trying to correct. The world will say otherwise, including many in his country. How will that impact us? Well, when he announced that there was a 10% across the board increase in tariff on all 129 or something countries, including Jamaica and Latin America, the Caribbean. Well, subsequent to that, the CARICOM private sector organization, I saw it in an online article passed to me, a legitimate online article, Caribbean article. I'm not sure if it's associated with one of our leading news media or so. But it had pictures, it had quotations, it had structured words. And the CARICOM private sector organization, which is not the PSOG of the Caribbean, CARICOM, they had met with the US trade representative who said that some of the tariffs that they had announced, particularly those on shipping that originate or made in China, ships, you know, not import tariffs. He will levy minimum $1 million US on all these ships. That will not hold for Caribbean. Again, this is a US trade representative. Our prime minister I've not seen anything in the public space or in the print media, electronic media either, stating how have we had any discussion with any senior level, either White House or senior state representative that can guarantee that our previous trade arrangements will hold, you know, and not be subsumed under this new announcement by Trump. So it can impact us. How else can it impact us apart from direct trading, you know, and the imposition of tariffs? Our economy is significantly entwined with the United States in many different levels. On trade, whether on merchandise, real goods, you know, financial, you know, many of us can refer to money that is remittance, as well as tourism. So if there's any significant movement in interest rate in the US, if the US economy slows down, thankfully we have not seen any sign of that as yet. But interestingly, there are still 90% of analysts who believe that there may be some increase in interest rate, maybe by the summer period. But if there's an increase in interest rate in the United States of America, we may have to increase interest rate also, even though we're holding inflation is fairly steady here. Why? Capital flight. We want to prevent capital flight. As stated in various publications and on this media, in a forum of the Caribbean, Barbados, Jamaica, I think 3 governors of the central bank and a convener from Trinidad, it was said that up to 47% of our savings, total savings in Jamaica, denominated in a hard currency, that is a foreign currency, particularly the US dollars. So it means that we are inclined to save in US. Why? Because we want to protect our investment and savings against devaluation when they save in Jamaican dollar. against a major trading partner. So we're safe in the US. But also, there are quite a number of people who will quickly remit their money to the US foreign institutions, where it may earn a better interest rate. Don't want that to happen. It will mean J dollar hard capital will be moving from Jamaica, as well as it means that people will be running down the US dollar, thereby further devaluing the Jamaican dollar, which will cause a round of inflation. Because we import nearly everything, including capital goods, right? Consumer goods, etc. Agricultural products, quite a lot we import. So that's the main link. Tariffs, yes, but also the interest rate connection.
Very interesting, because we've been keeping a keen eye on interest rates for the past couple of years. So I just want you to run that by us again, Clive, the connection between what is going on at the tariffs and the interest rates. Because how would that specifically, or is it just an indirect connection? Because I'm trying to tie up or connect the dots here.
Okay, right. Well, tariffs itself can cause several ways it can happen. One, tariffs may slow down the US economy. It's not just consumer goods that are imported. It's not easily substitutable good. That is, you can substitute labor from one, for example, Chinese labor into the US. In fact, there's an article where the Apple CEO, Tim Cook, who stated that it's not just the manufacture of Apple phones in China, which is the physical product itself, but he says in China, in a highly educated society, you can get your software engineer, you can get your materials engineer, you can get all the highly educated workforce you need much, much quicker and easier and much cheaper than you can in the United States. So it's not just a matter of the physical good itself, being made and transported to the US. Plus, the really manufacture, most of the things are designed in the US, etc. But he spoke to that, which was very interesting. So imagine moving goods, a plant to the US. It's a long-term planning to build that facility. Look around, plants are not built and in the whims of, not even as quick as a house can be built, right? It takes years of planning, years of, building that massive facility, machines, everything. How do you transport that? How do you move that to the US? So that is it will slow down production. Also, immediately, it will slow down consumption, which is a major driver of the US economy. So if that happens then, and also there are persons businesses and things that will maybe have to lay off people, at least in the short term, until they can readjust, which I'm sure will take 5, 6, 7, 8 years to readjust. So that temporary decline in the US economy, that temporary slowdown in the US economy could cause, they call it stagflation, inflation with a halt or slowdown in production, and that could cause inflation. If you have inflation, how do you manage that? The monetary tool is the increase interest rate. What interest rate does is to suck dollars out of people's hands, prevent it from running down scarce goods and supply, right? And thereby stem demand and thereby stem price increase. That's what interest rate does. Likewise here, when BOJ increases interest rate, they sell instruments to the market at a higher rate. People and businesses are more inclined to buy them at those higher rates. And that takes Jamaican dollars currency out of circulation, which stems demand and therefore stems price from moving upward and therefore holds back inflation. And it's a temporary evil for a longer term permanent good, right? Same principle holds in the United States. So if interest rate goes up as a result of that, inflation goes up, interest rate goes up, then people will move money from Jamaica, that is US dollar, they'll demand more US dollars to move it to the United States of America, right? And they'll demand more US dollars, pressuring the Jamaican dollar further, right? So those are the things we would want to avoid. And that's a connection between the two economies. Also, inflation rate in the US, a slowdown in economic activity in the US means that less remittance, it means that less working class Americans, if you look at the tourism, the significant majority of them are ordinary working people in the United States, families. There will be a slowdown in tourism. So there will be a slowdown in remittance, in FX earnings, in employment in the tourism, domestic, local tourism sector. That's the impact it will have if there's a slowdown in the U.S. economy. And that is the impact, slowdown in the U.S. economy, increase in inflation, increase subsequently in interest rate, and then the capital flight from Jamaica, seeking higher returns there. Of course, the reverse is that there's a slowdown in economic activity there. Remittance slows down. Tourism dollar slows down, are two major sources of FX earning. And you can just see the replicative effect on the Jamaican economy.
I tell you, America sneeze, Jamaica catch a cold.
Exactly.
So,
Yes,
so closely interconnected.
yes.
So what are the industries that are going to be most impacted by these tariffs, Clive?
Well, for the Caribbean and Jamaica, I need to hear more. I'm not sure for persons who have been, I'm sure we export every week, every month, right? I have not seen any information from any particular exporter to say that his this tariff also have been levied on his goods, right? I didn't see a date indicating when this would be effective. Of course, globally, his liberation document stated, timelines almost immediately. That is the following week. Yes, he has pushed back on some countries, some economies, and he has held back, and he has reduced, and he has increased. But when will it be broadly applied, especially to Latin America and the Caribbean? That is difficult to say. But if you look at our importing, which is published in both newspapers, our merchandise trade balance of payments and things, if you look at that and you look at the sectors where we import a lot, and the vast majority of that comes from the United States, as well as also probably about 50-something% of our export among our 6 or 7 major export partners. Probably about nearly 60% of that goes to the United States of America. If cost goes up, especially in light of a prospective slowdown in the U.S. economy, and Americans start to hold back spending in anticipation of a slowdown, if that happens, then it means that we will be impacted in terms of our export.
Okay.
So right across the board, everything we export, especially exotic food like fruits, yam, we export those things, yeah. All our producers, for example, the Grace Kennedy, the Seprod, the Jamaican diaspora who like to buy prefer to buy our locally produced food from our own domestic companies, all those may slow down. So
I saw an article recently about how much bun Jamaica exported this year or last year, whenever it was. Billions of dollars. Okay, here it is. $2.6 billion worth of bun and cheese between January and November 2024.
Yes, and I can assume there may be a slowdown, but those are probably less elastic, because they're kind of cultural and related to holidays, right? But there are a lot of things though that Jamaicans may not be so inclined, and that is cultural to the bun and cheese, perhaps, So I'm sure it will be impacted. But there are those goods that are probably more elastic in demand. So a slight movement in price can cut back demand significantly. Those are goods that people don't see as necessary. They are not, they are not necessarily attached to them as Jamaicans, as diasporans. Those could be impacted big time. So there is some big effect. There is a lot of effect that could be presented. Right. But so far, I've not seen or read anything that has shown any significantly negative impact. And the U.S. economy itself, based on this recent data, still show a very robust U.S. economy.
Who am I wants to know if there's any way that the Caribbean can protect against these tariff shocks?
Yes. Well, one, we need to increase domestic production. We need to give a lot of support, more so to all sectors, particularly the manufacturing sectors. We need to build alternative trading channels. Among Caribbean, we should be trading more. Guyana has discovered oil. Trinidad also. We need to invest more heavily among the Caribbean and the Latin America. Maybe we should extend further. I saw an article, about the Caribbean, Latin America, and Africa. There are several economies in Africa growing in excess of 7, 8, 9, 10%. We're unaware of that. Can we build a bridge there? But we need to diversify, though, our earnings, who we export to, as well as who we import from. But I tell you, remittance, though, where do our people, the majority of the diaspora lives, reside? It's in the US, Canada, and England. Especially the US. So that part will be very slow, very long, very tedious. But for the time being, in terms of who we trade, how do we source raw material, China is increasingly becoming a part of our economy. And they can say we can source capital goods, tractors, trucks, buses, parts, cheap, much, much cheaper from China. They're very, very efficient to the whole logistics of that. But how will that impact the US if the US is going to levy even tariffs on ships simply because they are registered, made, or coming or going to China just because of that? How will that be impacted? As I've said before, saw in this article, online article, Gervais, who is the recently retired CEO of Massey, he is the president or leads the CARICOM, private sector organization, and they had a discussion with a U.S. trade representative who said that that particular type of sanction or tariff will not be levied on Caribbean. I'm not sure how they're going to distinguish that or when, but that is what that article said. So hopefully there's a little bit of light in that tunnel there. But apart from that, the pronouncements, the pullback, the adjustment to different type of tariff, that is not healthy for any market. Even if he announces it and then pulls back, it is not healthy. Stability is important. Predictability is very important to any market. If you're going to build a business, you estimate your cost, you know what inflation rate is, you look at all the trading partners, resource availability, you look at that, you project that 5 to 10 years down the road, and you decide, okay, I'm going to spend 2, 3, 4, 10 billion Jamaican dollar. Situation like that since Trump took power, took office, has thrown all of that out the door. So much so also in another article I read. Interestingly, apparently there's a reaction that we have not read and seen much about. Republicans in Congress, U.S. trade organizations and institutions, state and other legislative representatives have all filed suit, apparently in various courts, state court and the Supreme Court, against Trump and his use of this executive order. But that again is maybe a year or 2 or 3 before we hear any conclusion or any, from a judge or anything on that. So in the time being, predictability, unpredictability, chaos, unsure of the medium to long term, all of that will be a feature of the market, the global market for now. So we can only wish for the best.
Yeah, trust me, Clive. Every time you come on, you give us so much to think about. Sean wanted to know why there isn't more manufacturing going on in Jamaica. We spoke about this last week, Sean. Electricity costs are so high, which makes it somewhat prohibitive. But thanks again, Clive. Much appreciated for all your insights.